The Evil Dead franchise is one of the most iconic, glorious, and unhinged horror film series ever created. What started as a terrifying low-budget nightmare that somehow turned into a bloodbath filled with deadites, then a medieval fantasy epic with barely any horror elements, and eventually returned to the horror genre with more gore and a touch of dark comedy. We'll be exploring all the various films within the Evil Dead franchise, though I won't be mentioning the Evil Dead the musical since I have never seen it, as well as Ash vs. the Evil Dead since I've only seen the first season and haven't explored the other seasons. Plus, the focus of this video will be the movies only. So let's see how this tone shifted from straight up horror to horror comedy. Also, there will be spoilers for these movies that I'll be talking about, so fair warning to those that don't want to get spoiled. Before The Evil Dead was created, it began as a student short film called Within the Woods, directed by Sam Raimi, who would later direct the trilogy of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man films, and was one of the most intense horror films of the decade during that time. Due to its extreme violence and restrictions in various countries, the film's production faced issues with securing funding due to these controversies. Almost every US distributor rejected it before a European company decided to take on it. This led to it being expanded into a feature-length film and was renamed to The Evil Dead and released publicly on October 15, 1981, when it was first released in the United States. When it was first released in the United States, it made $2,400,000, which was a decent success at the box office considering its low $375,000 budget. Even though critics gave the film mixed reviews at the time, it has since become recognized as an absolute classic in the horror genre and quickly became a cult classic that shaped the genre. Now, talking about the film itself, it was a bunch of friends at an isolated cabin in the woods where they discovered the Book of the Dead that releases the evil spirits called Deadites from hell that takes over the group of friends. The film was very violent, the camera was always in motion, the gore was extreme, the sound design had this eerie tone that makes you uneasy. It just has a dirty feeling to it, as if you're looking at something you shouldn't be. There is only fear, followed by more anxiety and more uneasiness, to a tree attack that becomes one of the most deranged moments. There is no humor, jokes, or comfort. Even in this debut film, Bruce Campbell plays Ash, who isn't the swaggy final boy we have come to know. He is just a man fighting to avoid death. One of the main reasons it still has such a strong impact now is that the entire thing remains unadulterated. It's like living in a nightmare, but in real life. Then a sequel titled Evil Dead 2 was produced and released in 1987. Its horror tone is very different from the original film. Raimi somehow decides to curate a comedy-infused remake of the original film with lots of humor being thrown around in the audience faces. The plot remains mostly the same, but 10 minutes in, Ash is already fighting with the Deadites, but this time, not only he is fighting them, he's also getting thrown around like a cartoon character, hitting himself in the face and laughing uncontrollably as blood flows all around the place. More precisely, it remains disturbing to this day. Raimi kept aspects of the first Evil Dead movie while also changing the original horror to a certain extent. The camera work is still the same, the gore is still dirtier than before, and Bruce Campbell transformed his character Ash into a more courageous and capable fighter compared to his previous film. However, later on, he'll become more of an anti-hero by acting impolitely, selfishly, and absurdly, which becomes apparent in the next film. Evil Dead truly establishes its identity at this point. This blend of humor and carnage is unique among other horror films and the genre itself. Even though it shouldn't work, it works very well. While it was a minor box office success for the film, by 1992, Army of Darkness came out and the horror was basically pushed to the side. Ash is transported back in time in this medieval kingdom and essentially fights in a battle with skeleton armies, falls in love with a girl, and turns into a fully formed action comedy hero. There's also medieval chaos, magic books, horror stop-motion skeletons, and some of the most corniest dialogue you have ever enjoyed. This is what the tone was. It has a very campy feeling that shifts the tone from the gritty, horrifying mood of the original film. Despite that, it still feels like an Evil Dead movie though. The same feeling of a mess, the same reaction you'll get from the gruesome kills. It simply hits in a different way. It's obvious that Raimi and Campbell were enjoying themselves. Yeah, it was horror-esque rather than the full genre, but there's still tons of entertainment throughout the film that elevates the tone, creating an experience that allows for experiments within this franchise that many other horror films don't tend to do with their franchise. Not only did horror fans adore it, but they also cosplayed and elevated Ash to a cultural figure. This was also the moment when this franchise turned itself into a cult classic for many fans for how different it is from mainstream films coming out during the 90s. The film made $21 million worldwide on a $11 million budget, making it a success for them. However, we didn't see any new films in the upcoming years. Well, there was The Evil Dead, the musical, that came out in 2003, though there wasn't anything new to bring up to this franchise. Until Fede Alvarez came along and took control of the next Evil Dead establishment. However, he gave us a brand new fresh start in 2013 with a remake with the same title as the first film, except the humor is completely gone. It's the same story with young adult characters stuck in a cabin in the woods, but there's a big difference in comparison to the past Evil Dead films. This one does not hold back when it comes to full-on horror. This is blatantly cruel, even more brutal than Raimi's original. It's disgusting in the greatest manner possible. People are tearing up their arms, cutting off their faces, and throwing up blood. Despite this change of tone, it still feels as though it belongs in the same world. The tone is really serious. The extensive gore is so much, it's honestly insane how this movie came to be. It seems as though the franchise brought its origins before deciding to turn the intensity even higher than before. By adding new places and people while sticking to the fundamental components that made the first movie so loved, it successfully revives the franchise with the new tone shift. Even so, the box office became a success with over $97 million worldwide on a $17 million budget. This led to the creation of the television show titled Ash vs. Evil Dead that had all of the ideal combination of all of these elements. It has the grossness, the blood, the humor, and the main highlight, Ash's total insanity. The tone at times becomes hilarious, sometimes grotesque, and at times just downright chaotic. Well, at least for the first season. I haven't seen the other two seasons, but with the research I did with the episodes from those seasons, it seems like it kept that energy too. However, right as soon as the show ended in 2018, in October 2019, Evil Dead Rise was announced and came out in 2023 due to COVID, but it became one of the well-known Evil Dead movies today. In this new Evil Dead film that still takes place in the same universe as the others, though we're not in a cabin this time, we are in an apartment building, and this time we don't have Ash or any of the other characters from the remake or the show, though there's that Evil Dead tone that continues to live on. The director, Lee Cornell, took the fundamental elements of Evil Dead, the demonic possession, unrelenting slaughter, and the Book of the Dead, and placed them in this Los Angeles apartment where there's nowhere to run. Although the tone is more similar to Alvarez's 2013 reboot, Cornell inserts a small amount of black comedy in the style of Raimi, especially that it's not exactly invisible when a possessed mother calls her kids some harsh words. Yet it's also terrifying. The portrayal of the Deadite mother by Ashlyn Sutherland is genuine nightmare imagery. The franchise demons are brought into a terrifying new focus by her twisted body language, unholy smile, and the cold joy she derives from torturing her family. And while the gore isn't as super gory as the remake, it still has those decapitations, vomit, and blood-filled elevators. This is the kind of film that wants you to experience every harm. This leads to my reasoning on why this makes this film stand out more than others, because Evil Dead Rise is about family. That is how the tension is increased. You care about these characters unlike the meaningless young adults of previous entries. It makes you sympathize with these characters, which will lead you to feeling bad whenever someone you were rooting for gets possessed by the Deadites. The horror is more powerful because of its emotional foundation, which also keeps the franchise moving forward. It's how many of the fans were pleased to have an Evil Dead film that can be more than its demonic possessions and extensive gore. Overall, it's one of the most bizarre tone shifts in horror history. It begins as a handcrafted nightmare, turns into an outstanding example of horror comedy, then transforms into the medieval fantasy, and now reappears as an updated Bloodbath Entertainment. That is the unique quality of Evil Dead. It isn't limited to a single tone of genre. It has no fear. It never plays safe. Whether it's making you laugh, frightening you to the end, or simply leaving you wondering what kind of film you just watched. The franchise will continue to evolve, experiment, and entertain in widely different ways. But that's all I have to say. I do quite enjoy the Evil Dead franchise. It's one of the many horror franchises that I still enjoy to this day. So hearing that another Evil Dead movie is in the works, calling it Evil Dead Brand, sounds really exciting and so curious on where they can take this universe towards. Perhaps another tone shift? Who knows? I'm quite a fan of Evil Dead Rise tone, so I wouldn't mind something new. But overall, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and let me know if there's any other horror franchises, movies, or even shows you guys want me to dive into more. Remember, opinions are subjective. Everyone has a right to their own opinion. Stay safe, take care of yourselves.